What is going on, Funnel Vision crew? Welcome back to another episode of Funnel Vision, where we help you performance marketers and agencies grow through all of these incredible conversations that we have with some of our incredible guests. And today is no different. We have a conversation on how you can earn more while working less. And we'll also talk about how to sell and how to kind of go through the M&A process of your agency. This is a topic that everybody wants, right? Who doesn't want to earn more and work less? And today's guest is an expert at this. His name is Karl Sakas. Karl, welcome to the show.
Mikkel, great to be here.
I'm excited to chat about this because this is obviously a topic that everybody wants, right? Everybody wants to, earn more and work less. That's why we start an agency kind of in the first place, but we always get stuck in that hamster wheel of working more in order to earn more. So we're going to help really kind of break that down for people. But before we do, like we always do for every single episode, we like to kind of start with your not so humble bragging rights. Why should people listen to you in a sense? What have you been able to do for clients? What have you been able to do for yourself?
Well, Karl Sakas here as an agency advisor. I've worked with over 600 agencies on every inhabited continent, drawing on my agency operations background that usually involves helping them, the owners, find ways to work less and earn more, which is the title of my most recent book, while also rewarding their best team members. So that could include things like helping a client in Texas double his income while cutting his hours in half, helping a client in Colorado have an exit. So now his big decision is whether to go skiing or fishing, although the season does help with that. Or, for instance, a client in Europe where he has stepped back to become the chair of the agency as another person runs it day to day. Everyone's unique, but work less, earn more.
I'm very excited to kind of dive into that. And you're right, everyone's unique, but having kind of worked with over 600 agencies, I'm sure you're going to see there's trends and there's things that you've noticed, and some frameworks that we can kind of unravel throughout this. So we'll dive into that. But before we do, let's take a step back. Let's humble you a little bit. Before you started working with 600, when you kind of got to number one, what was the journey like? How did you start, advising and coaching agencies? Walk me through a little bit of the journey.
Well, my very, very first agency client was as a freelance web designer in high school. I taught myself HTML back in the days of dial-up. And I noticed that although I was focusing on their website, I was certainly observing a lot about their business. And they were under a lot of pressure. People were often overworked and their clients were difficult and they needed things, right away and all that. And then fast forward more recently, working as the head of operations of one agency and then another, I noticed, 20 years later, some of the same problems. And I realized that this was a business opportunity, that I had experience doing consulting, working in digital marketing, working in agencies as a PM, a director of client services, director of operations. And I was like, this could be a business. And I had seen some other people doing it and was like, okay, let's make it happen. In terms of that first client in what's now Sakas Company, I actually recruited my then boss as my first client. I put together a 2-page proposal. The bullets were basically all but one at the end were about how she benefited from my going part-time as a contractor and, how she'd benefit from it. And there's one bullet at the end about how, by the way, I would use the additional time in the week to start a new business consulting to help other agencies grow. Her only question was, how soon do you want to start? And I was like, I should have asked for more money.
Yeah, that's always every time somebody's like, let's get started, or like, when can we go, or like, do you want my credit card? You're like, oh damn, probably should have asked for a little bit more because you probably would have still said yes. That's funny.
But it worked, and I'm a fan of having some initial revenue before you just start from scratch. It works.
Totally. It's really, it's hard to kind of have that abundance entrepreneurial mindset when, next week you've got to do, pay your mortgage or whatever it is. And that makes it really, really challenging for sure. Where was the kind of tipping point where you started to realize, okay, what I really want to help people around is this idea of working less and earning more. Where did that come into the journey? Was it a specific thing that happened and you were working with specific clients, or kind of walk me through, what that tipping point looked like?
There wasn't a specific point. It definitely evolved over time, but part of my process is doing team retreats twice a year with my team, separate from kind of ongoing meetings, ongoing conversations, to sit down and look at where have we been, where do we want to go, and what will it take to do that. And that includes looking at patterns across who are some of our best clients, what's uniquely the same across them in terms of patterns. And there is that theme of what became Work Less, Earn More and became the book title, which was that people were looking to not work crazy hours while also paying themselves more. And that turned into Work Less, Earn More. And to your point about it's something everyone wants, through one of my volunteer activities, I met someone who is a minister working part-time at two different churches. And she saw that I was working on the book and asked what the title was. And I said, it's called Work Less, Earn More. And she said, I want that too. So really universal appeal. The book applies really to anyone running any kind of professional services firm. But of course, I only work with agencies, so I wrote it for them.
Yeah, it is a universal. It's a great title, by the way. It is a very universal. It's one of those things that as soon as you see it on a bookshelf, you're like, yeah, I want that. So kudos to you for figuring that out and picking that up. I am curious in terms of what have you noticed when it comes to agencies who want to exit versus agencies who want to work less, earn more, in the sense of like they don't necessarily want to exit, but they certainly want their agency to work for them as opposed to them working for their agency. So if you were to kind of group these two personas in a sense, for the people listening, like for them to figure out like which one do I really want to be in, what does each look like?
One of the biggest drivers there is how much you like doing the day-to-day work of running a business. So we can think of it as a continuum. And I talk about this in the Work Less, Earn More book. At one end is running a lifestyle agency where you're paying yourself above market rates, you're making good profits, you're funding your retirement, but you're not necessarily planning to sell the agency at a particular point. At the other end, there's lifestyle. At one end would be equity. Equity is you want some sort of an exit event where you get paid for the equity you've built in your business. Most people are somewhere in the middle, but they're going to tend to lean one way or the other, leaning lifestyle or leaning equity. And that can change over time. I have some clients who are like, I never want to sell. And then things change and they do want to sell. And I have other clients who maybe plan to sell, but then I help them stabilize their business. And they're like, well, wait a minute, why would I sell? Everything's running smoothly. I'm making money. The biggest driver in as I'm advising people who are trying to decide is how much do you like the day-to-day of the business? For many agency owners, that's doing client strategy work for some of their higher-end clients, kind of higher-priced clients. For others, it may be around managing and developing their team. If you enjoy that, you might be like what one client said. They said, why would I want to sell? I'll just go off and start another agency. If that's you, you don't have to sell your agency. Like that's not required. You do want to understand your options if things change and you do want to sell. And I'll talk about that in my workshop later this year. But in that case, that's fine. If you lean toward lifestyle, you can continue being the face of the agency. You could be the thought leader behind things and all. Whereas if you're leaning more towards selling, maybe you have some activities that you're more interested in than running the agency. Maybe there's a different business that you want to run. Maybe your savings are at the point where if you have an exit at a certain price, maybe you never have to work again. Or maybe you don't work for a few years and you have some time to do other priorities. So it really comes down to how much do you like the realities of running your agency. There's some things you can delegate so that you're not having to do the least fun parts. But running an agency is still a hands-on business for most people.
Yeah, no. At the end of the day, anytime you own a business, even if you can get yourself out of the weeds. And even if you put in a CEO, even if you put in a COO, at the end of the day, it will still take over some mind share. And that's, I think, the key is people don't realize that at the end of the day, you're still the owner of the company. You're still the shareholder, the majority shareholder in most cases, if not 100% shareholder. So it's still this thing in the back of your head, even though somebody else is running the day to day. They could leave tomorrow, right? So it's still something that kind of drives people. And I've noticed that most people who do sell, when it's not a forced exit, it's more so because they just don't want that thing in their head anymore, and they want to kind of part ways from it. So when you think about that continuum that you talked about, right? Do you notice that regardless of whether you want to sell or you want to kind of earn more, work less in more of a lifestyle kind of framework, is the playbook ultimately the same? Are you kind of taking people down a very similar path in terms of like what they need to be focused on and thinking about? Obviously, selling, you've got to package it, you've got to find the exit and all that stuff. But before that, like, is it really, am I thinking the same way? And if so, what is that playbook? What does that look like?
The big similarity, whether you lean toward lifestyle or lean toward equity, is around making yourself increasingly optional. Now, what is optional? I talk about in the Work Less, Earn More book, we can imagine 4 stages, and you think of it visually as a fuel gauge, gas gauge on a car. And stage 1, you're mandatory. You can never get away. You couldn't go out to lunch without something blowing up while you're away. That's not good. Then you can get to stage 2 by delegating and doing different things there to get there. And at that point, you are necessary. It's better than mandatory, but not too much. You might be out for a few days. Your team's making decisions without you. Sometimes they're good decisions. Other times you've got a mess to clean up. And ideally, most people want to get to at least stage 3, which I call needed. That is needed, but not necessary. You go on vacation for a week or 2. Things are generally running smoothly. You can't disappear for a year, right? You're still probably signing contracts. You're still involved in some aspects of sales, most likely, kind of thing. But you could go away for a couple weeks and things are fine. And for some people, especially if they lean toward running a lifestyle agency, stage 3, making themselves needed, that's good. That works. But especially if you want to sell, but it works if you're leaning on the lifestyle side of things, you would want to get from stage 3 to stage 4, and stage 4 is optional. And at that point, you are just that. You are optional to the agency's functioning. And you could choose, you could step back to become, say, the chair of the agency. Maybe you hire a CEO, or you're elevating team members through a succession plan to get there. Maybe it's something else. Maybe you're just doing what for you is the fun stuff. And of course, that's unique for everyone, but your version of fun, kind of thing, and you're optional for everything else. Notably, you can be in different stages at the same time. Maybe, for instance, you are mandatory or necessary as the sales closer, but you're now optional as the person doing the initial screening. Or maybe you're needed. Maybe you're doing some thought leadership, but like your team can interview you and they create the rest of the content from there. That kind of thing. You can be in more than one place at once. One of the things that I do when I do an agency growth diagnostic project is I'll ask, day to day, what do you love doing? Day to day, what do you hate doing? And then what do you tolerate doing? Maybe you don't love it, but you don't hate it, you're okay with it. And then I look further at exactly how you're spending your time now and what do you want that to be. And that helps me recommend changes to make their ideal reality come true.
Yeah, I really like that idea of the fuel gauge and the concept of thinking of whether or not you're needed or you're optional or mandatory. Internally, when both for all my companies, really, when I look at how we do it in this very similar way. We just use kind of the RACI framework. If you've ever, for those who aren't familiar, RACI basically means R is you're responsible for this particular thing. A is you are accountable. which means that the results or that thing getting done is ultimately on you, even if you delegate it. The C stands for consulted, and the I stands for informed. And one of the things I always tell businesses that I consult is, when you put all of the activities, and if you were to put RACI, like RA, like, and you put your name and then all of the activities, how many of those is an A with your name, right? Are you accountable? Which means that ultimately the success of that thing, whether you delegate it or not, is on you. And if you can get to a stage where you just have an I, where you're just informed across the board, maybe you're consulted, then now things can operate really truly without you. But this concept is much easier when you think about needed, mandatory, et cetera. Very, very interesting. And then the difference then becomes, if I want to sell, I really should be optional in every aspect. Is that how you think about it?
Yes, the more optional you are, the better deal you're going to get if and when you sell. For instance, if you are heavily involved in recruiting employees and recruiting and sales for potential clients, the acquirer is like, well, I don't know, when are they ever going to leave? And when they do leave, is that going to hurt the recruiting pipeline and the sales pipeline? On the other hand, maybe you're sort of involved in recruiting team members and you are not involved in sales. Or maybe you make an appearance at the end as the founder, but that's it. Well, in that case, the acquirer is like, okay, sales isn't going to depend on this person. Maybe instead of a 3-year earnout, I would do, a year and a half, right? And they'd let you go sooner. The more optional you are, the better a deal you're going to get, because the acquirer is like, okay, things are more turnkey. The key with this is that you need to start that transition process as early as possible. If you want to sell in 10 years, you better have a strong number 2 in place in 5 years, or else you may not be able to sell in 10 years. If you want to sell in a year, there's really not much you can do at that point. Like, don't go to me, go straight to an M&A advisor and put the agency on the market for whatever deal you can get at the time. So, planning ahead is important. I saw sort of a sad article recently where the owner of a staffing firm had the business for 30 years. And he and his wife, or then girlfriend, now wife, had founded it, and they were shutting it down. This was an award-winning company that had placed thousands of people, had gotten Best Places to Work awards, had been the 3rd largest in the market. And the challenge they ran into, I think, I don't know them personally, but from what I pieced together, is that the owners were in their mid-60s. They were ready to stop working. They had 2 kids in their 20s, but they didn't want to take over. And the owner was like, I don't want to do an earnout where I stick around for a year or 2 and keep working. Like, basically, as the CEO, he wanted to stop working. If he had started that process a few years earlier, he would have probably had the option to sell. And I made some rough calculations. The business probably, if it had been for sale, probably would be around $3 million. So by waiting a couple of years too long, he lost $3 million.
Man, it's not a small amount of money to lose, right? That's a big difference in your retirement in that sense. So if people are thinking, okay, I want to be as optional as possible, right? With your kind of thought process, your framework, what do you advise people? What is that kind of playbook or that framework to kind of get yourself to be as optional as possible throughout that process? What do you kind of guide people on with that?
There are a lot of things you'll need to do to get there, including defining swim lanes or a RACI or RC matrix, and coaching and hiring the right people and things like that. But it starts by getting clear on where you want to go. For instance, I had a prospective client years ago say, it's like I'm standing on the edge of a field and I can see where I want to go off in the distance. I just need to know, where do I lay the asphalt to get there? Now, he was ahead of a lot of people because he knew where he wanted to go. If you're not sure where you want to go, well, it's hard to get there. And so I've created a tool that I've used myself and with clients that I call an advanced retrospective. And that's a visioning tool where you write about your ideal future day as if it's already happened. And if you're looking at selling, it's probably the day that the deal closes, or maybe the day that the earnout ends and you're off to new things. If it's lifestyle oriented, maybe it's as of a key birthday coming up, maybe as you're turning 40 or 50 or 60 or a future date. And you're writing about it as if it's already your perfect day. So today is such and such day, and it's a great day because, and then you write about it. The key thing there is that you're identifying what you want to be doing in your ideal situation. Maybe, for instance, you aren't meeting with any clients at all. You're only meeting with your team members. You've fully delegated all client work. Or maybe, you aren't running the agency at all. I've had some people do the exercise. One where I was speaking at the Soda conference in New York, and an owner run her agency for 20 years and did the exercise. And she came back and said, I'm not running the agency anymore. And she hadn't thought of it until imagining her ideal future and realizing the agency wasn't part of it. So use the advanced retrospective. Today is, pick your future date. It's a great day because, write about that, get clear on what your ideal is, and then you can work to make it happen.
Interesting. So, and then you take those steps. That's a very good strategy. A very that idea of risk retrospective. I do it all the time. I think it's very, very important for people to be clear as to why they do what they do, not why their business exists, but why they do what's their personal why, and what do they want to go to. And a lot of times we think too much about the why of our company, and it's like that's not the same a lot of times. So
that's a really important point. I think you've noted something that a lot of people need help around separating. There's the personal you, and your personal brand and marketing, but also just you as a human, and then the kind of the business version. And something I'll recommend is splitting the personal brand from the business brand over time. Like, here's a simple thing to look at. If you want to sell your agency, I had a client where, their goal was to sell. And I said, but I looked at your blog, your last 10 blog posts, you are the author of the past 7 out of 10. And my challenge was basically they would be, no more than 3 out of 10. I checked in a year later, we were doing other things in the meantime, and they were the author on 2 out of the 10 latest blogs. It's working.
Yeah. And that's how you become optional. And blogs are still being written and traffic's still coming. So, okay. We like to wrap up with this one question for everybody because, we're all marketers. You're a marketer. You help marketers and agencies, and we love tactics. We love shiny tactics. So I always want to know, from your perspective, based on everything you've done and what is working really well for you right now, what is the number one growth tactic that if you could go to any business, be like, you guys need to do this? What is that one thing?
My growth tactic here, and this is, primarily thinking of my work with agencies, but it's true for anyone in professional services, is a concept that I call inbound branding. And it's 3 things. Start by specializing. So, for instance, I only work with agencies, but for those listening, it could be either a particular industry that you focus on. It could be a horizontal service. It could be something else. But first, specialize. Second, thought leadership. That's whatever formats work for you and your audience. So, I'm currently writing my 4th book. I have 450 plus blog posts on my website, guest posts elsewhere, public speaking at events like Inbound and Content Marketing World and Bureau of Digital and Soda and others. And appearing on podcasts, to be meta. What are the techniques that work for you and that you like? Great. Share your thought leadership. And if you plan to sell, bring in your team to get their sharing as well. So it's not just you. And then the 3rd step is marketing automation. This is something a lot of agencies miss, which is staying top of mind so that when people are ready for help, maybe they found your article on something, they subscribe or they hear you speak or this or that, and they're getting content from you on a regular basis, whether it's a newsletter or something more, kind of automation, nurture-y kind of thing, so that you're top of mind. So when they're like, we need help with such and such, they're going to reach out to your agency first. So inbound branding, specialized thought leadership, marketing automation.
I love it. And if you stay consistent and do that for nonstop, it will pay dividends for sure. So, Karl, I appreciate your insights. I appreciate you helping all of our listeners. And thank you for being on the show. Where can people learn more about you?
If you'd like to check out the Work Less, Earn More book, that's available, including free chapter, links to Amazon worldwide, in print, digital, Kindle, and Audible, as well as a free workbook that goes with the book. That is at worklessearnmorebook.com, worklessearnmorebook.com. And then if you want to get in on the 450 plus articles, the newsletter that more than one agency leaders called the only email they read every time, go to sakasandcompany.com. That's Sakas, and the word company.com. There's a link for free resources, and you can get in on all of that. And yeah, that's, and if you'd like one-on-one help, I'm glad to chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll put all of those links as well in the show notes for everyone, and they can get easy access to those. Karl, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Mikhail.